Hi, everybody. Welcome to English Digest. I'm Stephanie.
I'm Tom.
It's our environment issue. We've got a 2-day issue to talk to you about. It's something that I never considered before. It's a demand for sand is actually causing some environmental destruction. It's also bringing about some corruption and also some violence. Some of the people who are seeing some of the corruption have wanted to go and been whistleblowers, which means you report to your government illegal things that are going on. Or maybe you go to the police and report to them things you've seen. But you do it as an anonymous person. You don't want people knowing your name, because if they do, you could be in danger or in peril of being killed or at least threatened or intimidated. It's kind of scary to be a whistleblower. I really admire people who do it, though, because they're heroes to us.
Right, but they are sticking their necks out, and they might get harmed and harassed or intimidated or even murdered. So, yeah, our hats go off to them. But this is a problem. Sand is disappearing all over the world because of construction demand. We need to have sand if we want to build those huge skyscrapers in our modern industrial cities. So, demand for sand is driving environmental destruction. Let's find out some more about this situation. Let's read today's article from top to bottom.
Uncontrolled sand mining has dreadful effects on the environment. Sucking up sand from riverbeds destroys the habitats of bottom-dwelling creatures. The sediment stirred up in the process can also suffocate fish and block out sunlight that underwater plants need. As well as threatening the wildlife found in rivers, this process has also caused significant harm to entire communities of people. The Mekong Delta, an area covered by a network of river systems in southern Vietnam, is home to 20 million people and supplies much of Southeast Asia's rice. Around 800 species of fish and the endangered Iriwati Dolphin also live there. But its environment is eroding away, with the riverbed having lowered in elevation by 1.4 meters in a mere decade. This is partly due to sand mining occurring upriver. The delta depends on sediment flowing down from Central Asia to replenish its riverbeds each year, but sand mining is depriving the area of these deposits. As a result, erosion is causing riverbanks to collapse, dragging farmland and residences down with them. Researchers say that half the delta's land will likely be gone by the end of the century if the situation isn't resolved. Fortunately, the industries where sand is used the most are working to create solutions to this critical issue. Researchers in the UK have made a new building material called finite by reshaping desert sand grains. It has half the carbon footprint of normal concrete and is even biodegradable. Some researchers are looking to grind down and recycle old concrete to use in new construction, while others are experimenting with sand alternatives, such as ash, plastic, or crushed palm shells and rice husks. But even with these new innovations, it will likely take substantial effort to curb the demand for sand.
Okay, let's get to it. Let's discuss the contents of today's lesson. Again, we're talking about sand, and demand for sand is driving environmental destruction. And I believe this is also a problem here in Taiwan as well, so don't think this is a problem that exists elsewhere. There is lots of construction going on in Taiwan all the time using concrete, which of course needs sand. And where do they get it? Of course, the first thing I think of when I think of sand in Taiwan is the beach at Fulong. I wonder if people are sneaking in there at night and trying to steal sand and selling it on the black market or something like that. I don't know. I'm just wondering that. But in any case here, let's talk about the contents of today's lesson. Uncontrolled sand mining has dreadful effects on the environment. So, yes, if it's uncontrolled, then of course it can really harm the environment. We're describing it as having dreadful effects. So here, dreadful just means really, really bad. You can use that to talk about bad situations. How is the food at that new restaurant? Oh, it was dreadful. It was awful. It was ghastly. It was horrible. I'm never going to eat there again. Dreadful can also mean that it causes a lot of suffering, a lot of pain, and a lot of destruction.
Right. So they're sucking up sand from riverbeds or the bottom of rivers. That's what the riverbed is. And it's destroying the habitats or homes of creatures that live on the bottom of the river. We're calling them bottom-dwelling creatures. So that's their home. And if you're taking away their homes, they have no place to live. Now, we also have the sediment, which is being stirred up in the process. Sediment is that stuff that settles to the bottom of a liquid. For example, say you have a glass of water. You're a kid. You have a glass of water. It has some sand in it. If you shake your glass a little bit, eventually everything will mix together. But then if you just set the glass down, all of the sand settles to the bottom. That's the sediment because the water is lighter. So you've got the stuff that is, circling around in the water as they suck up the sand. And in that process of taking the sand or sucking up the sand, that murky or unclear water is actually suffocating fish as it's happening, which is horrible. If you suffocate something, you are doing something so they can't breathe. You're obstructing their air or you're blocking their air. If you suffocate someone, usually in a TV show or in the movies, they'll take a pillow and they'll put a pillow over someone's face and hold it so they can't breathe. They're suffocating that person.
Right, or if you cut off the air supply, you might suffocate and stuff like that. So this is what happens to fish. The sediment gets stirred up, and then the fish cannot breathe properly, and they suffocate, they die, and then the sunlight can be blocked out, and those underwater plants need that sunlight, so they, of course, die, and then the fish don't have anything to eat, and then fishermen don't have any fish to catch, and people starve. You get the idea. As well as threatening the wildlife found in rivers, this process has also caused significant harm to entire communities of people. So in addition to threatening the wildlife, as well as threatening the wildlife that is found in rivers, this process also causes great harm, significant damage to entire communities of people. So yes, it not only threatens the wildlife in rivers, but also harms people nearby. Wildlife, of course, just refers to animals and plants as well that live in the wild. They don't live in the city. Well, they can live in the city, I suppose, if they're wild, but if they're not grown or raised by people, then it's wildlife.
Yeah, so the process of getting this sand has really caused a lot of harm to entire communities of people, as you can see. Now, moving on to the next paragraph, we're talking about an area in Vietnam, the Mekong Delta. It's an area covered by a network of river systems in southern Vietnam. A delta, when you see this word delta, it's usually an area where different river streams come together, and usually at the end of the delta is the ocean, and that water goes into the ocean. So we've got an area that's got a lot of river systems in southern Vietnam. It's also home to 20 million people and supplies much of Southeast Asia's rice. So rice is an important staple or basic food that people eat there, of course. It's also probably a place where they do a lot of fishing. So it's home to 20 million people. And like I said, it supplies a lot of the rice that is not only eaten in Vietnam, but shipped out to other countries or exported to other countries so they can have rice as well.
Yep, there are a lot of people there, 20 million people.
Yeah.
And, of course, they grow a lot of rice there, so that is threatened by removing sand from the Mekong River. Around 800 species of fish and the endangered Iriwati dolphin also live there. So you've got different kinds of fish living in the Mekong River, and you've also got the Iriwati dolphin, which is a dolphin, a very special creature that lives in Southeast Asia. Burma, Myanmar, and various other places as well. And it is threatened by this situation here. And, of course, its environment is eroding away, okay, because they're removing the sand. They're causing the riverbed to change in elevation. As it says here, the riverbed has lowered in elevation by 1.4 meters in a mere decade. In only 10 years, the elevation of the riverbed has gone down by 1.4 meters. The elevation just refers to how high something is, and this is referring to the actual elevation of the bottom of the river. So it's going down, which is bad. That, I guess, causes more erosion.
Elevation, of course, is related to the word elevator. We take elevators if we want to go from one floor to a higher floor. We also use elevation to talk about how easy or difficult it is to breathe. If you live in a country that has a high elevation, your lungs have to get used to the thinner air. But if you live like we do near the sea, it's pretty easy to breathe. There's more air down here, lower and closer to the sea or the ocean. So yeah, it's affecting the riverbeds. Notice that they're doing the sand mining upriver. So that's farther away from the delta. So if it's upriver, it's in towards the middle of the country. If you're downriver, you're closer to the ocean where the river would empty out its contents to the sea. So it's causing a lot of problems, as you can see. We're going to be talking about more of these issues. But first, guys, we're going to take a quick break and listen to our Chinese teacher.
各位同学大家好，我是 Patrick 老师。我们继续 Unit5 前一天的课程，深入了解滥采砂石所造成的世纪灾难。第二部分的课程侧重在环境浩劫。最后，我们也看到创新研究扭转危机的可能性。我们从第一段得知，滥采砂石到底如何破坏生态环境，在河床采砂会破坏河底生物的栖息地，让鱼类窒息。好，我们现在先来看看这部分有什么重要的句型。好，请同学看到 But its environment is eroding away, with the riverbed having lowered in elevation by 1.4 meters in a mere decade. 请注意到，首先这个 erode 是个不及物动词，表示呢侵蚀。那老师给大家一个例句，大家应该去过野柳吧？如果没有去过，或许也在图片上看过。这个例句是和野柳的女王头有关的。The iconic Queen's Head rock formation at Yellow Geopark in New Taipei City has been eroding away over time. 那这个女王头呢，因为风侵蚀的关系，所以一点一滴的呢，越变越小。接下来，请看到同样一个句子里面，这个 with 它其实是在附带说明主要子句的。河床在短短10年内就已经下降了 1.4 公尺。请同学特别注意到，这个 riverbed 后面 having lowered， 请把 having 的 ing 圈起来。我们要记得 with 附带说明主要子句的时候，后面这个动词千万不要忘了要加上 ing， 不要用原形哦。
We're going to take a quick break. Stay tuned. We'll be right back.
Okay, let's continue to talk about the sand crisis in the world. And where we left off, we were talking about the Mekong River Delta in southern Vietnam. Okay, so what's happening there with sand? Well, the delta there, the end of the river as it flows into the ocean there, it depends on sediment flowing down from Central Asia to replenish its riverbeds each year. But sand mining is depriving the area of these deposits. So, yes, they're taking sand away further upriver. And, of course, that means that more sediment will not go further south to the delta and settle in the riverbed there. So, of course, the river keeps on flowing and the sediment keeps flowing out into the ocean. But you need to replenish it. To replenish just means to resupply something. You just get more of a new thing in that place. But when the old goes away, there's not any new stuff to replace it. So it's not being replenished. So the riverbeds, of course, are going down in elevation as a result. And sand mining is depriving the area of these sediment deposits. To deprive just means to not give something to someone or something that needs it.
Yeah, I used to laugh with my friends and say that my mom deprived me of soda pop when I was growing up. I didn't get enough pop. So now I'm kind of addicted to it. I want it more because I never got it growing up. That's a joke. So if you deprive someone of something that they want or need, you're taking away from them or you're preventing them from having it. And we're saying that the sand mining is depriving the area of these deposits they need to replenish the riverbeds each year. Because you can imagine a lot of the sand in the riverbeds that are close to the ocean are flowing out into the ocean. So they're losing that sand, which is typically replenished or refilled by sand coming up from upriver or up the stream. So as a result, erosion is causing riverbanks to collapse. So they kind of fall into the river. The riverbanks are, of course, the sides of the river that you see. They're collapsing or falling, and they're dragging farmland and residences down with them. We've seen stuff like this happen where houses that are close to the river during big typhoons, when we get the floods, and those houses or hotels that are close to the river, sometimes the earth and the sand can't hold those hotels or houses up and they just fall or collapse into the water, which is horrible. That's what we're saying is happening here. A residence is simply a place where people live. So it's taking a lot of farmland that is used to grow food, but also people's homes down with them.
And researchers say that half the delta's land will likely be gone by the end of the century if the situation isn't resolved. So that's what researchers are saying. If this situation continues, if it does not improve, then half of that land will just flow into the ocean there, flow into the river and wash away. And it will take all those people with it. It will take all that farmland with it. That is not a good situation. People are not going to have enough rice in the future.
Well, here's the good news, or the more positive news, which will give us some hope. The industries where sand is used the most, well, of course, they're busy working to create solutions to this critical issue. So we've got researchers in the UK or the United Kingdom, and they've made a new building material that they're calling finite. So finite just means there's a limit to something. If you put in front of this, it's infinite, meaning there's no limit, infinite. I have infinite resources. I'll never run out of money. But this is finite, so there is a limit to something. That's what they've named the building material. And what it is they're actually going out and reshaping the desert sand grains that were found to be too round and smooth to be used in concrete. Well, they're changing those so that they can use them. Very smart.
It would be smart if it's economically feasible. It might actually take more money or it might require more money to do that than it would be to just go down to a beach somewhere and steal the sand. Hopefully this will become cheaper as time goes on. Yes, they can reshape those round desert sand grains and make them more like triangles or squares or whatever so they can stick together more easily. And again, we're talking about finite here. It has half the carbon footprint of normal concrete and is even biodegradable. So if you talk about how much carbon something produces and puts into the atmosphere, then you're talking about your carbon footprint. We all supposedly have our own carbon footprint. Carbon, of course, is an element, tan, I believe it's called in Chinese. And if something is biodegradable, that means it can return to the natural environment and become something else quickly, and instead of being sent to a dump somewhere or to an incinerator, and it will just be burned up that way.
Some other ideas include researchers who are looking to grind down and recycle old concrete. So if you grind down something, you take something and reduce it to smaller particles. We grind coffee beans in the morning. Some of you do out there. So it's the same sort of idea. They're going to grind down the old concrete and recycle it and use it in new construction, which is a great idea. Then others are also experimenting with sand alternatives, different types of things that can be used, like ash. Ash is wood that's been burned to where it's, gray and gross. And then there's plastic. You could use plastic, crushed palm shells from the beach, and even rice husks, which there should be a lot of rice husks out there. The husk, of course, is the part that covers the rice kernel.
So these are some alternates or alternatives, we could say, which is another choice.
Yeah.
Ash, of course, is what's left over after you burn something.
Right.
And plastic, of course, we all know what that is. And the crushed palm shells here, I guess palm trees produce a kind of fruit, and then they are covered with a hard surface on the outside. That would be a palm shell. So I guess you can use that in this construction process. And of course, since we all eat rice, the rice comes from a husk. That is the hard covering over a grain of rice. It has to be removed, of course, so that we can eat the rice. But those, of course, could be used to make this concrete as well. So these are some alternatives. But again, my concern is, hey, is it going to be more expensive to produce these things?
Usually it is at first. At
yeah, so it probably depends on some kind of government legislation. And then people, of course, will try to cheat that. And people will take bribes and stuff like that. So it's not an easy solution. But at least, somebody's thinking about changing the situation. But even with these new innovations, it will likely take substantial effort to curb the demand for sand. So an innovation, of course, is an improvement in something. An innovation, of course, could occur in your modern daily appliances that you use. There might be some new innovations in your smartphone, for example. It could have a bendable screen, or it could fold open or something. That might be a new innovation.
We always have new innovations or innovations in products because companies want you to keep buying their stuff. So it will likely take substantial effort to curb the demand for sand. Remember, we talked about the demand being people wanting something. That's the demand for a product. If you curb something, you're trying to limit it or control it, restrain it, get it to stop, increasing in size. So they're going to try to curb the demand or restrain the demand for sand. But I think we're going to keep seeing people trying to come up with new alternatives. That's my guess. So we'll see what happens. We wish them a lot of luck, though, and a lot of success. Right now, we're going to listen one more time to our Chinese teacher, and then we'll be back to wrap up.
好，我们接着看到第三段。第三段是在介绍湄公河三角洲生态破坏的元凶，就是河川上游的采砂活动。研究显示，如果这种破坏河川生态的情形没有改善，到了21世纪末，湄公河三角洲的面积可能会缩小一半。我们先一起看一下这边有什么重要的单字片语，请同学先看到第一句 The delta depends on sediment flowing down from Central Asia to replenish its riverbeds each year. 好，请同学把 replenish 画起来。replenish 是补充的意思。那英文解释呢，其实就是 fill something up again， 把什么东西填满，重新填满。 那由于最近武汉疫情从2020年爆发以来，影响了整个世界，老师用 replenish 给大家补充个例句。Before the lockdown, you must make sure to replenish the fridge with groceries. 很多城市其实呢都封城了，在封城之前，大家一定要确保自己的冰箱都填满了平常需要煮的这些菜。好，第二个单字 deprive， 请画起来。我们看到是在 But sand mining is depriving the area of these deposits. 采砂夺走了这个区域原本应有的沉积物。好，那 deprive 是剥夺的意思。老师再给大家一个例句 Twitter suspended former US President Donald Trump's account. Twitter 呢暂停了前美国总统川普他的账户，让他停权。The tech company deprived him of the means to communicate with his followers. 这家科技公司剥夺了前美国总统可以和支持者沟通的平台工具。接下来我们看一个有用的片语 If the situation isn't resolved, 如果状况没有改善，这是在 researchers 最后一句 Researchers say that half the Delta's land will likely be gone by the end of the century if the situation isn't resolved. 最后一段说明人类希望借由创新解决难题。这一段呢列出了3种方法。第一是英国研究人员所开发的新建材，叫做 Finite， 这是沙漠沙砾的改造，让它适合营造用。第二个是回收旧的混凝土。第三个则是运用其他的替代方案，比如塑胶、棕榈壳等。好，接下来呢，我们来看几个重要的句子。请看到第3句，这是关于倍数的用法。It has half the carbon footprint of normal concrete and is even biodegradable. 就是说 Finite 呢这一项新的发明，就是把沙漠的沙砾做了改造之后，它的碳足迹只有一般混凝土的一半。接下来第二个重点在第4句 Others are experimenting with sand alternatives. 还有其他的研究人员，他们试着做实验，要找出沙砾的替代方案。Experiment with sand alternatives. 好，以上呢就是我们 Unit 5第2天内容的解说，谢谢大家。
That is it for today's lesson. Thank you very much for listening, and hopefully this problem with the sand will be resolved eventually. And of course, here in Taiwan, it is a big concern because construction is a major industry. They need sand, and people work construction jobs. So, of course, this does affect us here in good old Taiwan. Thanks again for joining us. From all of us here at English Digest, I'm Tom.
I'm Stephanie.
Goodbye.
Bye.